When I first bought the cabin tucked away in the pines by the lake, I thought I had found peace. The HOA had rules, yes, but I figured they were harmless things like keeping the lawns trimmed and not letting your garbage pile up. My cabin wasn't even in their main community, it sat on the edge of their property line, but that didn't stop the board from poking their noses into my business. At first, it was little things, like, your fence is too rustic, or the color of your cabin door isn't approved. I laughed them off, because the cabin had been here 50 years before their precious HOA even existed. But the real trouble started one Saturday morning. I drove back from town with groceries, and right there in front of my gate, a shiny SUV sat parked. A woman in a crisp blazer stood with a group of strangers, pointing toward my cabin like she was selling it. My jaw nearly hit the ground. She had flyers in her hand with a photo of my cabin, my home, listed, for sale. I marched up, furious, and asked her what on earth she was doing. She looked at me as though I was interrupting her work and said she was conducting a showing. Apparently, the HOA president, Karen, yes, her real name, had told her the cabin was a community property investment and was going on the market. She even handed me a brochure with my address on it. I laughed at first, thinking this had to be a mistake. But when she showed me her paperwork, I realized Karen had actually filed a fake listing, complete with forged documents claiming she had authority over my property. The strangers she'd brought began whispering nervously when I told them I was the rightful owner, and that the cabin wasn't for sale. The realtor looked embarrassed, but insisted she had been hired by the HOA board. I told everyone to leave immediately before I called the sheriff. That night, I sat at my porch staring at the glowing lake, my heart pounding with anger. I had worked years to buy this cabin, my little retreat from a busy world, and now these entitled people wanted to snatch it from under me like I didn't matter. I wasn't about to let that happen. So the next morning, I drove into town and had a big steel gate installed at the entrance of my driveway. And on that gate, I placed my own hand-painted sign that read, "Private property, not for sale. Trespassers will be prosecuted." When the realtor came back with Karen the next week, they froze at the sight of it. I was standing on the porch with my coffee, waiting. If you came home and found out someone had listed your house for sale without permission, what would you do in that moment? Karen didn't take my sign or the locked gate very well. The very next morning, I found a bright orange notice taped to the bars of my new gate. It claimed I was in violation of community real estate policy and demanded that I remove the gate immediately. The audacity of it made my blood boil. This wasn't their land, this wasn't their cabin, and yet they strutted around as if they owned everything within shouting distance. I crumpled the notice into a ball and tossed it in the fire pit, but I underestimated how far Karen was willing to go. That Friday, I was chopping wood when I saw flashing lights at the end of the road. A county sheriff's car pulled up, and behind it was Karen's Lexus. She stepped out, smug as ever, as if she had already won. The sheriff came over to me, hat in hand, and explained they had received a complaint that I was illegally occupying HOA property. My jaw nearly dropped. Karen had filed a report claiming I was squatting on land that belonged to the community. I pulled out my deed, my purchase papers, and every bit of proof that the cabin had been in my family's name for decades. The sheriff flipped through the documents, gave Karen a sharp look, and told her there was nothing he could do. She fumed, insisting that the HOA bylaws gave her power over the entire lakefront area. The sheriff cut her off, saying bylaws didn't override state property laws, and unless she wanted to get herself arrested for filing false reports, she had better step back. Karen's face turned red and she stormed off, muttering threats about legal action. The sheriff gave me a sympathetic nod before leaving, but his words echoed in my mind. These HOA types don't quit easy. Be careful. That night, I hardly slept. I paced the living room, staring at the shadows across the lake. I knew Karen wouldn't stop at paperwork. She had an ego the size of a mountain, and I had just embarrassed her in front of the law. Sure enough, the following week, I found strangers creeping around the edges of my property again, this time without a realtor. When I shouted at them, they said they were just checking the place out, because the HOA had told them it was going to auction soon. Auction? My stomach twisted with rage. Karen wasn't just lying anymore. She was spreading rumors across the community to make people believe my home was practically up for grabs. That was the moment I knew I needed to hit back harder. I went into town, spoke to my lawyer, and had an official cease and desist drafted against the HOA and Karen personally. I posted a copy of it right beside my gate sign so that anyone who came snooping would see it. But Karen, oh no, she wasn't finished. A week later, she held an HOA board meeting and had the nerve to bring up my cabin as unfinished business. One of my neighbors, who secretly tipped me off, told me she was trying to pass a motion to forcibly annex my land into their community. The gall of it left me speechless. They wanted my property, plain and simple, because it sat right on the water and was worth more than half their cookie-cutter homes combined. And as I sat on my porch that night with the crickets chirping and the moonlight glistening across the water, I realized something. They thought they could bully me into submission, but they didn't know me. This cabin wasn't just wood and nails. It was my sanctuary, my blood, sweat, and tears. And I wasn't going to let an HOA Karen steal it out from under me. Do you think the sheriff did enough to stop Karen? Or should he have pressed charges right away for her false claims? Karen thought she was clever, but she underestimated how stubborn I could be. After weeks of harassment, lies, and fake showings, I decided it was time to put an end to this once and for all. My lawyer had already filed the cease and desist, but I knew paperwork alone wouldn't stop her. She thrived on drama and attention, so I needed a plan that would expose her in front of everyone she thought she ruled over. The opportunity came quicker than I expected. The HOA scheduled their annual community barbecue by the lake, and I knew Karen would use it as her stage to spread more lies about my cabin. So I prepared. I gathered every piece of evidence I had: copies of the fake listing, the forged paperwork with her signature, the sheriff's incident report, even testimonies from neighbors who had overheard her telling people my place was for sale. Then I made one more addition to my property sign, a large notice that read, "Evidence of fraud available upon request. Ask me about Karen." The day of the barbecue arrived. Music floated across the water, and families gathered under the pavilion. I could see Karen in the center, laughing loudly, shaking hands like a politician. Eventually, she raised her voice and started talking about future development opportunities on the lake. My blood boiled as I realized she was pointing in the direction of my cabin. That was my cue. I walked right into the middle of the crowd, holding a folder thick with documents. The music quieted and all eyes turned to me. I announced loud enough for everyone to hear. "For weeks, Karen has been lying to you. She told you my cabin was for sale. She even hired a realtor and forged papers to make it look official. But here's the truth. This is my private property, and Karen has been committing fraud to try and steal it." Gasps spread through the crowd as I held up the fake listing with Karen's name and contact details plastered across it. I showed them the sheriff's report, the cease and desist letter, and even played a voice message I had recorded where Karen bragged about how she'd have that cabin under HOA control soon enough. Karen's face drained of color. She stammered and tried to shout over me, claiming I was making things up, but the proof in my hands silenced her. Neighbors who once nodded politely at her now glared with disgust. The HOA board members shuffled uncomfortably, realizing they had been caught backing a fraud. And then, just when I thought the moment couldn't get better, the county sheriff himself showed up. Apparently, one of my neighbors had called after seeing the scene unfold. He walked over, took one look at my folder of evidence, and turned to Karen. "We warned you," he said coldly, "but you didn't listen." Right there, in front of the entire community, the sheriff placed Karen in handcuffs for filing false documents and attempting real estate fraud. The crowd erupted in whispers and shock as she screamed about conspiracies and how this isn't over. But it was. From that day forward, the HOA board never so much as looked at my property again. My gate stayed locked, my sign stayed up, and my cabin remained mine, untouchable. The peace I had dreamed of when I first bought the place finally returned, sweeter than before. On warm evenings, I sat by the fire pit, listening to the crackle of flames and the chorus of crickets, watching the reflection of the stars on the lake. Sometimes I thought about how close I had come to losing it all if I hadn't fought back. But the truth was simple. They messed with the wrong person. My cabin wasn't just real estate, it was home, history, and heart. And no entitled HOA or power-hungry Karen was ever going to take it away from me.